Thank you. We'll leave it.
It's all mine now. Huh?
Yes.
It's all mine now.
Yes, Raji. I leave the floor to Raji.
All right. I'm sorry that my voice is quite hoarse. If you don't hear the question or the answer clearly, let me know. We'll try and increase the volume. So the other day I kind of gave an introduction at how I came to Krishna consciousness. So today we've got a box full of questions. So we'll try and work our way through that. Okay.
Would you like one of the students to read out if you're finding it?
Yeah, you can if you like.
Would anyone like to him? He had a loud voice, but anyone with a loud voice can volunteer. How about read out the question?
Okay, so
how do you think ISKCON has developed all these years?
good question. Well, it depends on what viewpoint that you take. But in general, let's say at the time of Prabhupada's passing, we had 108 temples, 1 or 2 farming communities here and there, a couple of schools, a few restaurants, and basically that was it. So if you look now, a couple of years ago I was sitting and talking with one sannyasi from the Gaudiya Math. In Calcutta we have our Bhaktivedanta Research Center, and this man, Muni Maharaj, he's one of the descendants from Prabhupada's godbrother, and they have their place at Kalighat in Calcutta. So we were just chatting. So at one point he said, actually, how many centers does ISKCON have? So I said, well, the last I heard was about 600. So I thought completely, what? 600. So that includes ashrams, schools, restaurants, but any center where ISKCON has a presence. So from that perspective, I think we're doing pretty good. If you want to look at areas which still need a lot of work, well, everything always needs work just to maintain it. But there were a few things, aspects of Krishna consciousness that Prabhupada was keen on, but which we have not yet fulfilled. One of them was Varnashram. So the Varnashram system is described in the Bhagavatam. Prabhupada talked about it. I remember initially when I joined in 1972 in Sydney, I read an article by one of my godbrothers. His name was Karandar. At that time he was the leading devotee in ISKCON. He was the BBT trustee. He was the Los Angeles Temple president. He was very influential. Anyway, there was an article that he wrote, and there was a question and answers format. So one question put to him was, are you trying to revive the Varnashram system? He'd been talking about, the different aspects of human society, Brahmanas, Vaishyas, Kshatras, Vaishyas and Sudras, and the ashrams. So his reply was that we're not trying to introduce the Varnashram system. That would be somewhat a fanatical endeavor, reorganizing the whole of human society. But he said if we can our aim is to make a few good Brahmanas, or bring, people up to some people up to the Brahminical stage, then they could lead all the rest of society. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Can you hear? Yeah. So a couple of years later, things in ISKCON had developed quite rapidly from about 1960. From 1968, Prabhupada said that the movement began seriously in 1968. He had, of course, disciples, but up until that point,
I think that works now.
we had.
It doesn't work.
All right. We had about 50 initiated devotees by 1968 or 69. There was about 5 temples in America, nothing elsewhere, and that was it. By the 1972, we had over 500 or 600 initiated devotees. We had 50 centers. So in that 5 years, the movement expanded at least 10 times. So Prabhupada, he reacted to that by gradually introducing more and more aspects that couldn't be done with a smaller number of people. So he was saying,
It works now.
Hare Krishna. All right. So anyway, by 1974, Prabhupada started talking about establishing Varnashram. Then by 1977, he got really serious about it. He had come here to Mayapur in February of '77. We'd just been the previous month, we had been in. Hyderabad. There was a farm there, and that farming community, there was about 560 acres of land that had been donated to ISKCON, or at least put into a trust that we were controlling. And Prabhupada went down there for about 2 weeks, which was a little longer than what he normally stayed in any temple. Usually when he was traveling, he was spent 6-7 days, unless it was Mayapur or Vrindavan. But the other temples, they got a week if you were lucky. So Prabhupada stayed in Hyderabad. The farm was out in a place called Medchal. It was about an hour and a half from the city centre, where we had another temple that Prabhupada had inaugurated in August of 1976. So again, he came down in early December, and every day he was going for his usual morning walks, and he would go to a different area of the land. He would note down what was growing there or what was not growing there, and he was instructing the managers how to begin growing your own food. That was one of the first things. And Prabhupada's idea was that you could grow your own food, make your own cloth, make your own medicines, and make your own housing. So if you could do all of those things self-sufficiently, that was the basis of a Varnashram community. So Prabhupada looked around, he gave some advice, and there was some attempt to begin something. Prabhupada noted that most of the surrounding area, they were all farmers. So Prabhupada started a program in the evenings where he would have our devotees, and they made a small pandal, and then they would have some kirtan, they would have some very short talk, and then they would feed them sumptuous prasadam. So that was Prabhupada, the basis of Prabhupada's Varnashram society. And he explained that we could take different areas around the land, build, say, 10 or 12 houses, simple houses. In the middle, you have a deity, as long as it's Vishnu Tattva, because in that area they like to worship Balaji. We like to worship Radha Krishna. Prabhupada said it doesn't matter, as long as it's Vishnu, or Vishnu Tattva. So whatever they feel attracted to worship, then they can do that. So the idea was that the farmers would become attracted to our way of life, to the philosophy, and then if they got serious, then they could be invited to take 1 acre or 2 acres of land and develop that, build their house, and live there very simply in small groups. So that was his main idea. Very simple, not complex. And then later on, of course, if things developed, we could add more to that. But the Vaishya community, farming community, very important because they're basically the economic sector. If you don't have a good economy, then you can't develop your society. Prabhupada was asked about that one time when we were in Australia, that he said, first of all, you need a good economy if you're going to have a proper society. People have to feel some kind of economic surety, and then from that you can develop. So we spent that 2 weeks in Hyderabad in December, and Prabhupada gave a lot of instructions. Later on we came back up to Mayapur in mid-February. There's a well-known conversation that we had with Srila Prabhupada on the balcony of the Lotus building, where his house is. You've all been there? Yeah, you boys? You've seen Prabhupada's rooms in the Lotus building? So Prabhupada was out on the veranda, and a few GBCs came. Tamal Krishna Maharaj, I think, was there, and a few others. And he very strongly pushed his leaders that now we must begin the Varnashram system in ISKCON. So, of course, we all have various ideas about what that meant. But one thing that struck me was that Prabhupada was saying, that we must have it, but at the same time he was saying that we're a society of Vaishnavas, and Vaishnavas are beyond the Varnashram system. So Prabhupada said, no, even it may not be for our men, but to show an example for the rest of human society, we have to have some kind of display of Varnashram system. So anyway, apart from that, he said, we're not Vaishnavas. Vaishnava means being beyond the Brahman. So he said, some of our men, they're not even following proper principles, they're not chanting their rounds. So they should be, make up part of that Varnashram system. And those who are qualified, they should teach it to others. So that Varnashram idea, again in mid-1977, Prabhupada, he was in his room, Brahmananda was there, Tamal Krishna was there, I was there, a few others, and somehow Prabhupada had made this comment, I don't know exactly when, but he had made this comment that only 50% of his work was done. There was another 50% to be done, and that 50% was Varnashram. So, looking back, because that was 1977, now we're at 2022. We don't really have much to show in terms of Varnashram. We've got some educational processes going on. We are gradually developing some communities that are Brahminical. So there's something is there, but not very much. So that 50% then, I think, is one of the things to answer the question, how do you think that we're doing? That 50% Varnashram development, that still has to be done. That's for us to do. By us, I mean you guys. I'm not including myself, I'll be out the door soon, so. But this is some challenge that the new generations of Krishna conscious devotees should take up, how to develop this Varnashram system. If it becomes successful, gradually Prabhupada indicated we could actually induce people, ordinary people, they have the vote, democracy, so let them vote for Krishna conscious leaders. And those Krishna conscious leaders, they should change the human society to a Brahminical community. So we can see nowadays what's happening with the non-Brahminical classes of men. We've got a whole full-on war going on in Ukraine at the moment, but that's not something new. You know, we've seen every 10, 20 years another war, another war, another war. Why? Because people are greedy. They have lower class behavior and understandings. They have no idea about spiritual life whatsoever, and so they think that everything is up for grabs. The economy, the land, whatever. They like to fight. Who's going to control this piece of land? Who control that piece of land? Who's going to get the oil from the Middle East? Who's going to get the gas and petroleum from Russia? And they're quite willing to literally bomb, innocent citizens, so-called innocent citizens, and blow them off the face of the planet, which is what they're doing right now. So that may calm down. Then in another 10 years or 20 years, there'll be another war. Previously in the 1990s, we had the Balkans War. Before that, we had the Vietnam War, the Korean War. The Chinese are always attacking the Japanese, and the communists trying to take over. So there's always conflict in human society because they don't know actually what the proper structure of society is meant to be. There's no sense of Varnashram. So Varnashram is a system whereby everybody can be included, everybody can make spiritual advancement, and then they don't have to fight over facilities or materials which are not theirs anyway. We can't say that we own anything, and we don't. We're here temporarily. But what we can do is pass on the real idea of spiritual life, train people up to become at least Brahmanas and Vaishnavas, and then things will be peaceful. And the goal of human life, instead of just aimlessly wandering around, people have a goal, how to elevate themselves to the point where they don't have to take birth again in this material world. So the first thing we've got to do is to convince people that we are not these bodies. Without that understanding, nothing can be developed. So that was one of Prabhupada's main aims. We've got the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium. That's meant to show, Prabhupada said, at least prove that we are souls. He said if you can just do that, then all the rest will come automatically. So that's our idea. We're developing this Temple of the Vedic Planetarium exhibition wing. We were just having a meeting the other day with Jataka Maharaj and others about what that will include. We're about to hire some big company to help us build the exhibits, etc. It'll take some years. We are expecting or aiming for 2024, I think, for opening the temple. We'd like to have at least one floor or 2 floors in the exhibition side, which are ready for people to see, and then gradually we'll develop the rest. So anyway, the idea of human society, what it is, how it should behave, that's all Varnashram. So if we understand it properly and introduce it gradually, people may get fed up with bombing each other and killing each other, and they may actually do something a little constructive. So that's 50% still to be done. There's other things like schools. We had the original school in Dallas. Somehow or another that petered out. We've had schools in other places. We've had these schools here in Mayapur for quite some years now. So personally I feel a little hopeful when I'm sitting here and looking at you all, that what could be, the potential that could be done. So it's nice to see that you're getting a chance to live as human beings and not like animals as they are in the Kami society. I have a friend, he's one of the top musicians in Sydney in Australia. We met a long time ago when I emigrated on the boat from England to Australia in '71. I met him on the boat. Later on we lost contact, then after about 17 or 18 years I discovered his whereabouts. So we talk quite regularly, and what was I going to say? No, I've forgotten. Okay, you have to skip that one. Can't remember what I was going to say. Anyway, the point is that we want to induce people to take up spiritual life. If you do that, then your problems are mainly solved. So, Varnashram is one thing. The schools, that's right. So anyway, this friend of mine, he has a son who's in his late teens now. So my friend Ken, he came here to Mayapur for about a week or so. We had some time in Jagannath Puri. So I took him out to the school, the Gurukul. And he was immediately very impressed. He said, I wish I could put my son in a school like this. Because his son was already getting into heavy drugs and hanging out with, loafers and layabouts. So his life was being spoiled. And his father could see that, but there's nothing he could do about it because he didn't have an alternative. So when he saw our Gurukul, he said, that gave me some hope. So that I wish my son could grow up in that kind of atmosphere. So the educational system is very important. Prabhupada wanted us to have schools. It's very encouraging. I mean, I've been in Mayapur now since 1996. So it's very encouraging to see how somehow or another, against all odds, the SMIS is still running. Now you've got Mother Rachi Tambra, she's been here forever. So it's good. You have an atmosphere of goodness. And we've got the temple, we've got all the deities. So it creates an atmosphere where you can be sane, not driven by, the economic society. You must have this, you must have that, get this car, get that, whatever it may be, electronic smartphones or whatever. If we were really smart, then why are we in the situation that we're in? So we have to try to change it. We hope that all the students in our various schools go on when they leave school, become good, maintain their position as devotees, and try to change society in some way or another. It can be done when people get fed up with what, they've been cheated by the politicians, and they'll look for alternatives. So if we have some alternatives, that will be very good for all of us. So schools, ashram, I can't think. Do you have any other things?
There's questions.
Yes. So the answer is that I think on the whole ISKCON is doing okay. We've been through some tough times when Prabhupada left. We had the Acharya system at one point. We had problems with the Gurukuls at one point, with unscrupulous persons posing as devotees but taking advantage of the kids. So we had that whole thing. But we've managed to somehow or another come through most of the horrible things, and now something very nice is developing. Okay, so any quick questions on that topic? No? All right. Okay, next one. What is your definition of happiness? Good question. Happiness, Prabhupada, in different ways described, like a hungry man, if he eats a meal, he feels satisfied. That's one kind of happiness. You can at least get your basic commodities of life. But when I first joined, there was this, I told this the other day, there was a devotee called Upendra, and he had been Prabhupada's personal servant in 67, 68. He was one of the first devotees to come to Australia, him and Bali Mahadan. And he wrote an article that I read in my first or second BTG. True happiness must be eternal. True happiness must be eternal. If you're getting your happiness, deriving your happiness from temporary sense gratification, that temporary nature is a disturbance. You just get happy with one thing and then boom, it's gone. However, somebody blows you up or you die in an accident, you get a disease. But everything in the material world is temporary, and therefore nobody can be happy. No sane person would try to become happy by acquiring and developing material pleasures, yes, or objects of the senses. We have to go beyond that. If you want to be really happy, you have to at least know that you're not the body. As soon as you know that you're not the body, then you can be satisfied. Okay, I know after a certain period of time, I'm going to leave this body, I'll take a birth somewhere else. But whatever spiritual attributes that we've developed remain with us as we go from one body to the next until we get to the point where we don't have to take birth again. So that's happiness, knowing that you're not this body. It's distressing to think that you are the body. If you think you are this body, then what will happen? It will be taken away by some means or another. Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi. This is Dukkhadoshana Dasanam. So this is one of the items that Krishna says that constitutes education, knowing the misery of birth, death, disease and old age. You have to keep that in mind always, whatever you're doing. This is going to lead me up or lead me down. Yeah. Is it going to improve my consciousness? Is it going to pollute it? So these things that in life we're always making choices. Even Krishna, when he spoke with Arjuna, he at the end of his instructions to Arjuna, and he asked him, now, this is all, this what I've told you constitutes knowledge, so now you choose, what do you want? And the answer was, you choose, you decide. So we all have that bit of independence. I mean, you're just coming to the point now where you're going to be out on your own. You've had the shelter of the family, shelter of the school system, shelter of the society. But you're going to have to make decisions. What you want to do with your life, how you want to live it. The information is there, but it's our choice. So in Bhagavad Gita, that instruction of Krishna to Arjuna is very important. What will you do with it? It's not all over just when you've learned something. Now you choose what you want to be, what you want to do. Very, very important. So, that's another one. Were you close to Srila Prabhupada? What was he like? That's from Radha Leela. I forgot to mention the names. I remember about a year after I'd been on Prabhupada's party. Prior to joining Prabhupada's party, I was the temple commander in Vrindavan. The temple had just opened in Ram Navami, 75. I was lucky that I was there for that. Later on, I decided, after returning to Australia, I decided I didn't like it there anymore. So I decided to go back and do something in Vrindavan. As soon as I arrived in Vrindavan, I got off the Tunga from the Mathura railway station, I rode out to the temple, which in those days was kind of on the periphery of Vrindavan village. As soon as I got off the Tanga, one of the devotees, Bhagavad Srila Prabhu, he just joined about 9 months before, and he saw me as I was getting off the Tanga. He yelled out in delight, we were old friends, and he grabbed me and he dragged me into the temple president's office, Kayananda Swami, and he said, I found our new temple commander. So I'd only been there 5 minutes and I was already the temple commander. So I lasted a couple of months. And then Prabhupada came at the end of the year and he needed somebody to do his massage. I happened to be in Delhi just for the day on some private business, but because Prabhupada arrived the same day, I hung out for 3 or 4 days. Gopal Krishna Maharaj asked me to be the door guard during Prabhupada's darshans. So I had a few days there, and then we went to Kurukshetra for a day, and we went back to Vrindavan. So that was at the beginning of December. And I was allowed to continue giving Prabhupada his massage. Prabhupada told his other servants, now give him a full servant's responsibilities. So I became Prabhupada's regular servant. That was supposed to last for about 8 or 9 days. In the end, it stretched to about 1.5 years. So anyway, one of the devotees, his name's Smara Hari. He's a very old friend of mine, good friend. He was in the temple at that time. So after we come back from the last world tour in August or September of '76, I was talking with Smara. We had 3 months in Vrindavan. So I was talking with Smara and he said, I think that you must be one of Prabhupada's favorites. So I told him not so. Prabhupada does not have favorites. Prabhupada engages everybody equally. He has equal affection for all of us. So on one hand, if you say, were you close to Srila Prabhupada, I can say yes. On the other hand, I have to say that everybody was. Nothing special, don't get puffed up. So, yes, we felt close to Srila Prabhupada as long as we followed his instructions. Yeah, it's not a sentimental thing. If you're close to somebody, it's because they help you, you help them, you derive some satisfaction from each other's association, and that pleases the spiritual master if you follow his instructions. So in that sense, yes, there was some favoritism, but not some favoritism that was exclusive. It was a different kind of favoritism. Prabhupada was favoring us by coming to the West. Prabhupada favored us by taking such austere ways of life, in living in New York for a year in the Bowery, horrible place, just for us. So that he was showing us some favor. Because Prabhupada was preaching to anybody and everybody that he met. But the ones who actually became his favorites, so to speak, were the ones that took his instruction, they took his example, and they followed it. Then they became his favorites. So that way then, that's how you please, or you become the favorite of the Guru, called Guru Preshta. There's one of Prabhupada's godbrothers. He liked to advertise that he's got this big temple, and he was the secretary of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and so therefore he is Guru Shrestha, very dear to the Guru. So Prabhupada was never advertised himself as being very dear to his Guru, but he said, I must have done something that he liked, because otherwise how could we have had so much success in preaching and setting up ISKCON? That success is there because he said, I seek it out. Why am I so fortunate more than my godbrothers? He said, and only for this reason, because I very strictly followed whatever my spiritual master told me. Therefore I became favored. Otherwise, he said, what am I? That conversation we had in January of 1977 in Bhubaneswar. That was Prabhupada's analysis. That sometimes his godbrothers would say, oh, you're so favored by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And I would search out, well, what is it? He said, and this is my answer, that I only work for his pleasure, not for anything else. Okay, so what was Prabhupada like? That was the second question on the sheet there. He was the most unusual, wonderful person you ever met. Let's try another one. What does that say?
How did you come to ISKCON?
How did I come to ISKCON? You weren't here the other day.
You've answered this.
I
question.
already answered that one. It's a long story.
Did Prabhupada ever chastise you? If he did, then what was your first experience?
Relief.
Ananchitan. Really?
Did Prabhupada have a
Chastise you?
chastisement? Yes. Not frequently, but sometimes it was the different levels of Prabhupada's anger. Sometimes you do something and wrong, and Prabhupada would kind of correct you by some sarcasm or cutting remark. Not heavy, but just enough to get you on the right track. Sometimes if you did something really foolish, then he would get actually angry, and he would may shout at you. And sometimes, on 1 or 2 occasions, disciples did something so extraordinarily stupid or foolish that Prabhupada would be so disgusted that he wouldn't even say anything about it. That was the worst one. If he yelled at you, that relieved all the cobwebs in your brain. Yeah, so you could see clearly again. Because generally speaking, when we got into trouble, made a mistake, it was due to our being in the mode of, ignorance and passion. So Prabhupada, sometimes he had to shout at us to bring us out of that material stupor. There's a few incidences that I can relate to on that one. We were in Vrindavan in '76, and some friends of mine had arrived from Australia, a couple of friends. So after the class, Prabhupada and his breakfast, Prabhupada would go and lay down on the roof in his rooms there in the sunshine. And the devotees had fixed up a bell system so that if Prabhupada was upstairs, formally, where there was no warning bell or anything, if Prabhupada needed anything, so I would have to sit up there on the roof with Prabhupada. His rooms there, when you went up the steps, there was like a covered veranda. There was a room next to that, and on the other side of that room, then there was another area of the roof where Prabhupada, we would put like not a cushion, a mattress, and Prabhupada would lie down on there for about an hour and then come back down. So the very first day that I was made his full-time servant in '75 in Vrindavan, Prabhupada had his lunch. He went upstairs, I followed him. He went inside the room. He said, now I'm going to take rest for an hour. There was a mat on the floor on the veranda outside the door. He said, now you sit here. He said, and now your only business is to be with me 24 hours. So that was it. That was my first instruction. So anyway, familiarity breeds contempt, as they say. A year later, I'm in Vrindavan. I see my friends. The devotees had fixed the bell so that if Prabhupada was upstairs, he could press a button. The bell would sound downstairs, so I didn't have to be on the roof all the time. I could go down and do some other things. So I saw these devotees, so after Prabhupada took rest, I went down and we started talking. And I'm one of those kinds of people that like to hear the sound of their own voice. So, a bit like my mother, she never stops talking. So anyway, we're talking and talking. And I started to feel, where's Prabhupada? I've been here nearly an hour now. He's taking some extra rest today. So it was starting to, in the back of my brain, there was a voice there, do something, something's wrong. And then a few minutes later, this German devotee, what was his name? Maharati. He'd formerly been a butcher actually, before he became a devotee. They used to drink glasses of hot blood at the abattoirs. He became a devotee somehow or another. So he was staying in the guest house, and I'm talking to these friends of mine at the entrance to Prabhupada's rooms, and all of a sudden Maharati comes flying around the corner from the guest house. As soon as I saw him, I suddenly realized what was going on. And he yelled at me, he said, "You better get up on the roof, Prabhupada's locked on the roof." As soon as I saw him, I suddenly remembered my brain started working, and I realized I'd actually locked Prabhupada on the roof. So I didn't stop to talk. I ran up the steps. I got to on the veranda. The door was leading in the room, and on the other side there was another door leading onto the back of the terrace. So usually, whenever we came into Prabhupada's presence, or whenever he came into our presence, whatever, you offer your obeisances. That's the first thing. Then you ask, what would you like? So Prabhupada it was such a crazy thing. I didn't even wait to offer my obeisances. I saw on the other side of the screen door, Prabhupada was standing there looking through the screen, waiting for me to come up. And as soon as I came into the room, he was glowering at me. And he said, "You rascal," he said, "I've been here for an hour." So, and he told some other devotees he might keep me a prisoner. So I just opened the door it was locked on the inside. So I absent-mindedly, when we went up the top, I was thinking, now Prabhupada will take rest. I can go down because the bus is there. If he needs me, he can ring the buzzer. Unfortunately, the buzzer was on the inside of the room. So Prabhupada was on the outside, and he couldn't get in because I'd locked the door from the inside. So I didn't even wait to offer my obeisances. I just threw the sliding bolt. Prabhupada walked past me, didn't say a word. Told me what anyway, I followed him downstairs, and Prabhupada sat behind his desk. He said, "You are so dull." So he told me off, and then he let it drop. It was nearly time for his massage, so we went out into the garden. I started giving Prabhupada his massage, and the whole massage, it was like a black cloud hanging over my head. I just felt so down and horrible, and I could tell that somehow or another, although I had apologized when we got downstairs, "I'm sorry, I'll never do that again," but I could feel something was still there. So during the massage, it came to me, "You've got to rectify this. You've made an offense, now you've got to rectify it." So at the end of Prabhupada's massage, he had his bath, then he had his lunch, and again he went upstairs. And when he went upstairs, somebody put his rocking chair there. So Prabhupada sat for a few minutes in his rocking chair. So I followed him up. As soon as Prabhupada was sat on the rocking chair, I laid full out dandavats, and sincerely and honestly as I could, I told Prabhupada, "I'm sorry, I'll never ever do that again." So when I said that, Prabhupada smiled, and then when he smiled, this old black cloud just gone, and was back to normal. So I could feel the effects of the offense. But as soon as Prabhupada smiled, then that was it. It was left. So that was Prabhupada. If you did something wrong, he might chastise you, but he never generally brought it up again, as long as you didn't do it again. I mean, the whole time that I was with him, there was one incident before I joined his party, when I was temple commander in Vrindavan, where I got into a fight with a young Bengali guy. And Prabhupada told me off. He told me it was a big offense, and I had to find this boy and bring him back to the temple and apologize. Anyway, so that incident, when 2 months later I became Prabhupada's servant, full-time servant, Prabhupada never mentioned that incident again, ever. It was done, it was over with. You know, I thought now I've done such an offense to my spiritual master. And yet 2 months later, I was his full-time servant. So again, Prabhupada didn't mind as long as he corrected things. So with the locking him up on the roof, that was an offense. There was another one that was much worse. When we left Vrindavan after the Gaurpurnima festival, we were going down to Bombay, and Pushta Krishna Maharaj, who had just been appointed Prabhupada's permanent secretary, and he was also GBC for South Africa. So he had brought from Germany, he had driven overland with Srila Prabhupada, a Mercedes limousine. Not exactly a limousine, but a big, brand new Mercedes vehicle from Germany. And they drove it overland, they got to Mayapur, then they brought it over to Vrindavan side for the rest of the festival. So on the last day there, then this other boy, Chachi Guru, he was from Punjab. So he was going to take care of the vehicle whilst Prabhupada was overseas. So we were halfway between Vrindavan and Delhi, and we came to Palwal. So in Palwal they had a divided highway. So, one going one way, one line going the other way. In the middle there was a divider about 1.5 feet high, quite high up. So we came into Palwal. Pushta Krishna was explaining to Chaitya Guru, this knob's for this is for that. He was explaining the works of the car. And he was doing about 70 miles an hour. And there wasn't that much traffic at that time in the morning, but he was going fast. And he was looking at Chaitya Guru, explaining this and that. I was sat in the back with Srila Prabhupada, and I looked through the windscreen and I could see up ahead there was a camel cart, and it was overtaking a bullock cart. The bullock cart had straw, you know how they stack the straw up really, really high. So there was a couple of guys sitting on this bullock cart with all the straw, and they were up on the top of the straw. And there was a camel cart coming from behind and gradually overtaking. So the distance between us and the central divider was getting smaller and smaller. I thought, Pushta Krishna hasn't seen what's going on. I better tell him. Then I thought, no, he doesn't like to be told anything. So I hesitated. Then after another couple of seconds, I thought, this is it, we're going to hit him. And just at that moment, Pushta Krishna looked up and he saw this bullock cart and camel cart, and it was too late. He jammed the brakes on, the wheels started to lock, so he had to release the brakes, and we kind of cannoned through the gap between the bullock cart and the central divider. We got halfway past. In the bullock carts they have these big axles, wooden axles. And just as we got level with that, Prabhupada's side of the car, we hit this bullock cart, and the axle smashed a hole in the door. Because it was a Mercedes, it was big and heavy, so the momentum carried us through. I looked behind us as we went past, and the two guys that were on the straw on the bullock cart came falling down. And then another car, typical in India, some guy in an ambassador, he was thinking, he's getting through, I'll get through right after him. So we got through, he didn't. He plowed into the bullock cart. The whole thing came down in a big heap. I don't know what happened to them, but we didn't hang around, because in India, if you get into that kind of situation, you might start a riot. We couldn't afford to have Prabhupada, taking a risk like that. So we just cannoned through. The momentum kept us going. And then Prabhupada was sitting in the back. I saw him, he gritted his teeth. He said, "You were going so fast." And then he checked himself. He stopped himself from saying anything more. And he never said another word for the rest of the trip. You know, he just sat there in stone cold silence. So that was one of the worst experiences. And when we got to Delhi, he couldn't get out his side of the car because the door had kind of sprung. It was still locked, fortunately, but it had sprung. So he had to get out my side of the car. Then he came around and he saw this hole in the door. And he said, "All right, get it fixed." And he didn't say anything more about it. Pushpa Krishna offered his obeisances and apologies. But when he did that, I got the distinct impression that he had not cleared the offense. He'd, made some attempt, but he didn't clear it. My experience later on with the locking him on the roof, I knew the offense was still hanging over my head, and so I made another attempt, sincerely as I could, to clear it, and he accepted that. I didn't get the same feeling when Pushpa Krishna smashed the car. And later on, actually, it turned out he was only chanting 2 rounds a day. He was an intelligent man. He was very active. Prabhupada liked him, but he wasn't following the principles. As a result of that, he couldn't recognize when he'd done something wrong. And in fact, when we arrived in Melbourne on the first leg of the last world tour, I was telling Balaram, who was the temple president in Melbourne, about this incident with the car crash. And I told him it was Pushpa's fault. He wasn't watching what he was doing. Pushpa Krishna happened to go past me at that moment, and he very angrily rebuked me. It wasn't my fault. So I could see he had offered his obeisances, but actually in his heart, he had not accepted that he was at fault. Because of that and other things, he later on left within a few months. He left his active service. So anyway, that's a couple of examples. There's lots more, but I don't think we have enough time now, do we? What time are we finishing? 8:30. All right. Okay, so that's a few short stories. We can do something again sometime.
Yes, once we get list, that's Mother's desire. So I'll get back to you and let's work out the schedule.
Okay. So thank you all very much.
Let's thank Prabhupada attending us, Mantra. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Hare.
Srila Prabhupada ki.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was good.